I am just so tired of this. If you have said that sentence or something similar about your own business in the past few months, I want you to know two things right now. You are not alone, and it does not automatically mean that you should quit. It might mean you're burned out. It might mean that you are standing right before the hardest stretch turns into the really good part. Or it might mean something else entirely. And today we're going to sort through which one that is. Welcome back to Small Business Simplified. I'm Karin Velez, multi-passionate entrepreneur and your business big sister. This episode came out of a handful of conversations that I have had recently, all with tiny business owners, somewhere between year 1 and year 3. Different industries, different products, same sentence. I don't know if I'm burned out or if I just picked the wrong thing to build a business around. And I've been that person more than once. So today I want to slow down and walk through this very carefully because how you answer that question matters. It is literally the difference between walking away from something that maybe was about to really work and staying in something that just genuinely needs to end. We're going to cover what burnout looks like for small business owners specifically, what the typical growth curve looks like so you have something real to measure your feelings against, and how a sneaky little bias called the sunk cost fallacy shows up right when you're trying to make your decisions. Let's get into it. Okay, so saying or feeling like you are just tired of it all is a true feeling. But your job is to figure out what's underneath it before you let that feeling make a decision for you. Everything we talk about today is really just different ways of answering the same question. What is this feeling actually telling me? And I guess the first question is this normal? Right? And I think a lot of tiny business owners feel like, admitting that they're tired means admitting that they failed in some way. So let's just take the shame out of it completely right away. There is research, real research on entrepreneurial burnout. And what it shows is that this feeling is very common, and it's especially common in the early years. So depending on the study, somewhere between a quarter and nearly 3/4 of business owners report meaningful burnout symptoms, and the numbers climb higher for people running the business mostly alone. If you have one or two people doing the job of what would actually be a whole department at a larger company, and you're doing it in year 1 or 2 before your systems have caught up with your workload, feeling wiped out is, the default setting, So if you've been beating yourself up for feeling this way, let that go. Understand that that feeling is totally normal. What matters is what you do with it. So burnout in a tiny business doesn't usually come from just one bad day or 1 week, okay? It builds. Researchers who study workplace burnout describe it with something called the job demands resources model. And the idea is actually very simple. Burnout shows up when the demands on you consistently outweigh the resources that you have to meet them. So if you're an employee, resources might be the manager who shares the workload with you, or a team that you can lean on, and having a very clear end to your workday. But if you're a solopreneur or a tiny business owner, a lot of those resources just don't exist yet for you. You're building those at the same time that you're doing the actual work, okay? So there are a few things that tend to drive this especially hard in the first few years. And the first one is not having any kind of institutional buffer, right? If you're an employee at a larger company, you have an HR department. There are coworkers to help cover the workload. There are sick days that are generally already built into the system. When you're the owner, you are the HR department and you are the coworker, and you may not have a sick day policy. And most of us haven't built any of those yet at the early stages of our business. The second thing that drives this is just uneven cash flow. Okay, there is data on small employer firms that shows that around half of them report inconsistent cash flow, and over half of them say that they have struggled to cover operating expenses at some point or another. I absolutely understand this. This was me in my small business management company, at least the first 18 months or so, right? There was always concern about whether or not there was going to be enough there to pay the bills and make the payroll. That kind of financial unpredictability is exhausting. And it just kind of sits there in this low grade, constant way, just underneath the surface, even when your business is technically fine. And then the third thing is identity fusion. And this happens with, probably every solopreneur, okay? Every tiny business owner. When your business is new, it is very easy for, the idea that the business is struggling to turn into an identity crisis of I am failing. Even though those are two very different things, right? That blurring of that line is a really fast path to burnout, because now every setback feels personal when really it's operational. And we have to understand that there has to be a defined line between where we begin and the business ends, or where the business ends and we begin, I guess. So when do we take this seriously? How do you tell the difference between a really hard week or a really hard month and something that maybe needs some real attention? Burnout research generally points to 3 different components, and I think they actually make a pretty good check-in for us when we're asking ourselves these questions. The first one is exhaustion, the physical and emotional kind that doesn't go away with a weekend off. Okay, go back to the episode that I did on rest within our business and see where it is that you might be failing yourself in terms of actually getting rest. And then decide, is the exhaustion that I'm feeling as a result of just not giving myself the breaks that I need to? And when I do give that break, truly give myself that break, am I still exhausted? Okay. The second thing is detachment. If you are feeling very cynical or totally checked out from work that you used to really care about, that's a signal, right? If you're just kind of answering your client emails on autopilot, right? You're not really feeling the joy or excitement when a sale comes in. That might be a little bit of a red flag. And then just a shrinking sense of accomplishment, the sense that nothing you do is enough, even when the numbers say otherwise. So one of those things on a bad week, that's just being human, okay? That is just the emotional roller coaster of being a business owner. But if you have all 3 of those and they're sticking around for weeks at a time, that's worth paying attention to. And it's maybe worth talking to a doctor or a therapist about, not just pushing through it, okay? Because you can experience real burnout, and it can affect you not just emotionally, but physically, okay? So, this episode can help you name what's happening, but it is absolutely not a substitute for real support if you actually need it, all right? So let's talk about the part that nobody warns us about when we go into business for ourselves. There is a typical shape of a tiny business's growth. And a lot of what feels like failure in the moment is actually just timing. There is a concept called the J curve, and it describes the shape that most new businesses follow. So it's a dip at first, where the costs and the effort outpace the revenue by a lot, probably, before a climb into real profitability. So this is just kind of the normal shape of things. And federal data backs this up. Roughly half of new businesses are still operating at the 5-year mark, and the ones that make it past that early window have a much better odds of lasting another 5 and then another 5, right? So the first 2 to 3 years are absolutely the hardest, the most expensive, the most uncertain time in our business. But they're also the stretch right before the businesses that make it start to see it pay off. So, this is the period in which I am just so tired of this usually shows up. Right when the invoices are unpredictable, the sales just aren't right there. You're still building your systems by hand, and you just haven't seen the version of your business that runs a little bit smoother. If you're 2 years in and exhausted, you might be standing closer to the turn in that curve than you think. Not always, but often enough that it's worth kind of doing a check-in before you make that decision. And here's where it gets tricky, because I don't want this episode to talk anyone into staying in a business that genuinely needs to end. So let's talk about the sunk cost fallacy, and then let's talk honestly about real reasons that you might want to close the doors to your business. The sunk cost fallacy is a well-documented bias in decision-making research. We tend to keep investing in something because of what we've already put into it, time, money, our entire identity, whatever it is, rather than what the future actually looks like from here. The money that you've already spent, the years that you've already given, none of that can be recovered either way. So it really should not be the thing that decides your next move. So for a tiny business owner, this shows up as, I've put 3 years into this, I can't quit now. That's the fallacy talking, okay? If you don't have evidence that the business is working, then that's the fallacy. So how do you tell the difference between sunk cost thinking and a real signal that it might be time to close the doors? Ask yourself some questions. Is the exhaustion that you're feeling about the pace at which you are working, or is it the business itself? If you love the work and the customers or the clients, and you just haven't built sustainable systems yet, then that's a burnout problem, and that's something that can be solved. It's not necessarily something to close your business over. If you removed everything that you've already invested from the equation, would you start this business again today, knowing what you know now? Would you choose to start it over again if you could keep all of that knowledge? Is there a realistic path to making a profit from where you're standing right now on a timeline that you could survive? So is there an actual specific path that gets you where you want to be? And can you hold on for how long it seems like that's going to take? And then what is staying costing you, whether that's financially or physically or in your personal relationships, compared to what closing the doors would cost? That one's a really good one to think about. If the answers to these questions point to, this could genuinely work, I am just feeling really depleted right now, okay, then that is a call for you to rest, get some support, build some better systems. It doesn't mean it's time to close the doors. But if the answers point to, there's really no path here, and I would only stay because of what I've already put into it, that's the fallacy. And you need to pay attention to that answer. Closing a business that has just run its course doesn't mean that you failed. It's actually a good business decision if you're making it with sort of clarity after asking yourself all of these questions. So here's what I want to leave you with. That feeling of just being tired of it is real, and it absolutely deserves your attention. But it is a feeling that you should sort of investigate. It is not a decision that has already been made. Some of you are burned out, but you are standing right at the edge of the hardest part, turning into the really good part. Some of you are holding on to something that's already told you that it's over, and the only thing keeping you in it is what you've already put into it. Only you can tell which one is true for you. Now you've got real questions that you can ask yourself instead of just a tired feeling to react to. If you want a place to talk through this with people who get it, solopreneurs and small team business owners doing this same hard, honest work, come join us in the Growth Table Small Business Collective. growthtablesbc.com. I'll leave the link in the show notes. You've got this, whichever direction it turns out to be, and I am cheering you on, and I will see you next Wednesday.